Everybody, welcome back to month number 2 of the Echo Leadership Podcast. My name is Andy Wood, and I am so thrilled that you are joining us for another round. I want to say a special thanks to those of you who subscribed, those of you who made comments, and especially those of you who shared online to help us get the word out, to help more leaders get better. Our goal here with the podcast is to help you become the kind of leader the people on your team want to follow. Now, it's one thing to have people that have to follow you because you pay them, but it's a whole nother thing to be the kind of leader that people actually want to follow. And we think the best way to do this is just to give you practical content that you can put into practice that week, that month, and that you can discuss with your teams. So we're going to try something a little different today. We're continuing to move the ball down the field ourselves. We want to say thanks to those of you actually who shared your feedback with us as well. So we're taking a page out of the Netflix book, and we're going to give you content that you can binge on, but we're going to break it down in 12-minute segments. So this month, we're going to have a theme. The theme for this month is leadership credibility. And we're going to talk about 8 easy ways to destroy your credibility as a leader. It's really easy, really quick to destroy your credibility. In fact, you can build credibility for decades and destroy it in days. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to dial into some of the bad decisions that leaders make, especially during times of crisis. And we'll get there. But before we do, I want to, first of all, tell you more about myself. So I am a leader. I've been a pastor now for over 20 years. I started off in student ministry, but before student ministry, gained a desire to learn about leadership early on. My dad was an entrepreneur. I watched him as a kid start multiple businesses, and I saw at 15, 16, 17 years old the value of leadership. I watched as my dad led employees and made money, and the stresses that he endured as an entrepreneur. If you are an entrepreneur, you know how sometimes it can be high highs and low lows. And I began during that season of my life, even in the church that I was going to growing up, watching and learning how different leaders responded to different situations. And I saw that when a leader is a good leader, everybody around them succeeds. Everybody around them improves. And organizations rise and fall on great leadership. So I began to read everything I could. At 18, 19 years old, I picked up a book by John Maxwell. It was called The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. It's been in multiple different iterations, and that sent me on a journey. Back then, there was this conference every summer, and it was called the Global Leadership Summit. It still is going today. And I remember at 19 years old, driving over to this church in Chicago called Willow Creek Church. And that summer, I sat and took pages and pages of notes on leadership. From that point, I was always looking for mentors, people who would pour into me. And I've been able to have the privilege of being around some of the greatest leaders in our country, being mentored by CEOs. And for 20 years now, just been studying so much on this subject. I see everything through the lens of leadership, maybe even sometimes to a fault. When I read the Bible as a pastor, I see it through the lens of leadership. And I just have a huge passion to help leaders win. So within that, that's what this podcast is all about. One thing for me personally is I like content, and I like it to be broken down in a way that I can do something with it. So that's really how we're going to frame our time together. It's going to be stuff that you can talk about with your team, that you can apply and put into action immediately. Now, for our time together this month, I want to ask you to think about it in a couple of different ways. So we'll do an introduction right now to the subject that we're going to talk about, and then we'll break it down into 4 practical ways that you can apply the bigger concepts. And you can either listen to it all at once. It'll be about an hour long, or you can break it down. So you can go episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It'll be about 12 minutes long, 10 to 12 minutes. And you could listen to it on a walk. You can listen to it on a bathroom break, on your way to work. But we're putting it in bite-sized pieces. So for people who only have time to listen to a little, they can, or people who want to binge listen, they can listen the whole month. Like, I don't know about you, but sometimes, like, if I'm listening to a podcast and it's part 1, 2, and 3, and I'm I love part one, but then I got to wait a week or a month. I forget about it by the time the week or the month comes. So we're just going to give it all to you at once, and you can go through it. Maybe even you think about going through it with your team. Have people listen to it on the front end and then talk about it in your staff meetings or your team meetings. We even have a group at our church that is going to use this content for one of their small groups to discuss it during the week. So there are a lot of different ways that you can go through it. But for our subject today, I want to transition and talk about the subject of credibility as a leader. Right now, as I sit here and record this, it's Q2 of 2020. We have witnessed one of the greatest seasons of crisis that I have ever seen as a leader. And naturally, when I look at the crisis, everything that I see in terms of politics and how CEOs respond, I have seen it through the lens of leadership. And I have wrestled through, now even in my own, challenges, I have leadership at home with kids that are 13, 11, 6, and my wife, who I've been married to for 17 years. I have leadership at the church that I lead. And I think of this crisis through the lens of leadership, my leadership and the leadership of other people that I'm watching, how they're responding. In fact, maybe you have gotten multiple emails from CEOs or nonprofit leaders telling you how they're responding to the crisis or how they were going to lead their organizations back into a reentry plan. And there's so much leadership that is happening. But one of the things that I've noticed is there are certain things that really resonate with me as a leader, and there are certain things that really are a turnoff. And I'm not going to get political on you. In fact, there's probably people who are extreme left, extreme right listening. But my goal is not politics, is to help you get better as a leader. And one thing that I'm sure you could agree on is some things that some leaders say, they make you lose credibility. They lose credibility in your eyes as a leader. And maybe even before the crisis, you liked them or you wanted to follow them, but then their way of leading through the crisis pushed you away. And the inverse would be true as well, that there are leaders who've gained credibility during the crisis in your eyes. Their leadership capacity, their character has gone up in your mind. Crisis has a way of impacting the way that we see the leaders around us. And one of the phrases that's been thrown out so much over the last couple of months, in fact, Forbes wrote an article, and the title of the article, or a huge part of it, was this phrase, "Cash is king." And when the crisis hit, in March and late March, that was the thing everybody's talking about. You got to preserve your cash and make sure that you have enough money in the bank. And I would totally agree with that entrepreneurs, CEOs, leaders really do need to think about cash. But I would disagree with the statement, cash is king. And I would say credibility is king. Now, this is not a theological statement if you're a pastor. This is purely a practical statement about leadership. I would choose credibility over cash any day. I would choose the credibility that is required to lead people over a bank account with millions in it. I'd take them both if I could get it. But if I had to choose one, I would choose credibility. It is a whole lot easier to build cash than it is, or to rebuild cash than it is to rebuild credibility. And I want you to write this down if you can, unless you're driving or walking. And this will all be in our notes that we're going to post online. It's basically a talking guide or a study guide for you to go through with your team. But this phrase is super important. Credibility is the currency of leadership. Credibility is the currency of leadership. And your leadership is either building credibility or tearing credibility down. People will start following you because of your style as a leader, but they'll keep following you because of your substance, the substance of your character. And I want to help you today focus in on that substance aspect of your leadership. In fact, this is a definition that I'm working with. Integrity plus wise leadership over time, it leads to credibility. Integrity plus wise leadership over time leads to credibility. And credibility takes years to build and only days to destroy. So your decisions as a leader have the power to either build or destroy your credibility. And in crisis, it's more significant. It's more important. I think of it a lot like poker. I've been watching, I'm not sure if any of you guys have watched The Last Dance with Michael Jordan. That's been streaming in the midst of the crisis. I pretty much have binge watched it. I got to the show a little bit late. So if I'm thinking about gambling a little bit too much, it's because I've been watching Michael Jordan. And so I remember, though, in college, we used to play poker. And we go over my friend Marcus's apartment, and we play poker together. And I was really bad because I never knew when to go all in. I would think that, I had a good hand and I'd go all in and it would destroy me. And part of playing poker is knowing when to go all in with your chips. And what happens when you go all in is you have the opportunity to double or to multiply what is in your hand. And crisis is a significant opportunity as a leader to go all in. And the decisions that you make as a leader, if you go all in, are wise decisions. If they lead the mission forward, it's gonna multiply your credibility as a leader. So crisis is an incredibly important time to build credibility. It's a really easy time to tear it down. And so we're gonna have fun over these next few episodes as we get super practical. How do you build credibility? And what is it that people that destroy credibility do? We want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Echo Leadership Podcast. We hope that you'll continue to join us for this journey, the practical tools to building credibility. We want to encourage you to go online, to subscribe, to rate it, to review it, to make a comment, to let us know that you're joining. We're trying to build a community here to help you get better as a leader, to help you become the kind of leader that everybody on your team wants to follow. Thanks so much. This has been part 1 of month 2 of the Echo Leadership Podcast.